Let us look at the evidence, not the feelings, not the impressions, not the story either of you has been telling yourselves about what happened and what it means and where things currently stand, the evidence. Because here is what I have learned from years of sitting with the cards and years before that of sitting with human behavior in contexts considerably less forgiving than a tarot reading. What people do tells a more accurate story than what people say, and what people cannot stop themselves from doing tells the most accurate story of all. And this person cannot stop themselves from thinking about you, from picking up their phone, from putting it back down, from constructing opening lines in their head and dismantling them, from living in the private interior of their daily life in a state of sustained, consuming, occasionally maddening preoccupation with the question of whether and how and when to reach out to you. That is not moving on. That is the precise opposite of moving on. And I want to show you exactly how I know. First, a moment for this community because they have earned considerably more than a perfunctory acknowledgement. Something I have noticed across the last several readings is how many of you are carrying a very specific kind of uncertainty, not uncertainty about whether someone has feelings, uncertainty about whether your perception of those feelings is trustworthy, whether what you sense is real or whether you have, as people sometimes do when they care about an outcome, manufactured evidence to support a conclusion you wanted to reach. That particular self-doubt, that questioning of your own perception is something I want to address today inside this reading itself rather than just in this opening, because what you sense is almost always more reliable than you give it credit for. More on that in a moment. To everyone here returning or arriving for the first time, thank you. This space is yours as much as it is mine. Now, the evidence. Let us go through it properly. The first piece, they have not actually gone anywhere. I know that might seem like an odd place to begin, given that the premise of this reading is that you think they have moved on. But the architecture of moving on has specific characteristics that are not present in what I am reading here, and I want to name those missing characteristics because their absence is itself significant data. Moving on looks like redirection. Like someone who has genuinely turned their attention toward new things, new people, new investments of their emotional and mental resources because the previous investment has been processed and released rather than simply suppressed. Moving on has a particular quality of settled completion, not necessarily happiness about what happened, but a relationship to it that is past tense in an actual rather than performed sense. What I am reading in this person is neither of those things. What I am reading is active suppression masquerading as completion. Someone who has constructed a convincing surface narrative of having moved forward while underneath that surface, in the place where the actual living of their interior life happens, something remains entirely unresolved and entirely present. The performance of moving on and the reality of moving on are two different things. This person is giving a creditable performance. The reality is something else. Let me describe the obsessing because the title names it directly, and I do not want to sidestep it into something softer or more comfortable. Obsessing is a strong word. It implies a loss of voluntary control over the direction of one's own attention. A compulsive quality to the returning, the circling, the inability to leave something alone, even when leaving it alone, would be demonstrably better for one's peace of mind. That is precisely what I am reading here. The returning is not chosen. That is the first thing to understand. This person is not sitting down at intervals and deliberately deciding to think about you. The thinking about you arrives, uninvited, in the middle of things that have nothing to do with you, in the gap between one task and the next, in the passenger seat, on the way somewhere, in the shower, in the specific unguarded moment between putting the phone down and actually managing to sleep. You arrive there in their mind without announcement. And once you have arrived, they cannot simply direct you back out the way a person can redirect a chosen thought, because you are not a chosen thought. You are something closer to a resident, something that has established itself in the interior architecture of their daily life with a permanence that is proving considerably more durable than they anticipated when they first made the decision, whatever that decision was, to create distance between you. The reaching out obsession specifically, this is the part I want to examine with the most precision, because it is the part the reading is being most emphatic about, and I think it is the most useful piece of information available to you right now. There is a specific psychological loop that a person enters when they want to do something that they simultaneously believe they should not do or cannot do or are not certain they have the right to do. The loop is circular by nature. It goes something like this. The impulse to reach out arrives. It is strong, specific. It carries with it a fully formed sense of what they want to say and why, and the relief that the saying of it would produce. Then the counter-argument arrives, also specific. A list, usually, of reasons why reaching out is inadvisable, the risk of rejection, the possibility of misreading the situation, the vulnerability of being the one to break a silence that the other person has apparently been comfortable maintaining, the pride consideration, the fear that reaching out will confirm a desperation they are not willing to be seen having. The counter-argument wins. The phone is put down. The message is not sent. For approximately 40 minutes to several hours, depending on the day and the intensity of current distractions, a fragile equilibrium is maintained. Then the impulse returns. This person is living in that loop, has been living in it for longer than would be the case if the wanting underneath the loop were anything less than genuinely significant. Something just came through that I want to examine carefully before I present it, because it is shifting the picture slightly and I want to make sure I have it right. There is a specific incident, a moment or an exchange or a particular development in the situation between you that functions as the central point of reference in this person's loop. The thing they return to most consistently, the scene that plays most often in the internal review that has been running in them since whatever the relevant point of departure was. And what is interesting about this scene, what I am picking up that I did not initially expect, is that their relationship to it is not straightforward. It is not simply a good memory they are trying to return to, or a regretted moment they are trying to undo. It is something more ambiguous than that, something that contains simultaneously what they valued most about what existed between you and what they feel most uncertain about in terms of where they stand with you now. The specific moment or exchange that concentrated both the wanting and the uncertainty into a single point of reference. They return to it because it contains the answer to the question they most need answered, which is not whether you are worth reaching out to. They have already answered that question. The question they cannot answer from the scene alone, which is why they keep returning to it, looking for new information it does not contain, is whether you would want them to. Let me speak to that question directly, because I think it is the actual center of this reading and everything else has been building toward it. The obsessive quality of what this person is experiencing is not fundamentally about them and their feelings. It is about you and yours. Specifically about the radical uncertainty they are experiencing regarding where you currently stand in relation to them. They do not know if they have lost you, not in the clean, conclusive sense of knowing. They have theories, evidence they have assembled and interpreted and then reinterpreted when the interpretation produced an answer they found unbearable. They have days when they feel certain the door is still open and days when they feel equally certain it is not. They have read things you have said or not said or done or not done for information that those things were not necessarily designed to carry. The uncertainty is what is generating the loop, because a person who was certain they had lost you would grieve and redirect, which is the actual structure of moving on. And a person who was certain they still had access to you would simply reach out, which is the direct and obvious solution to wanting to be in contact. It is the uncertainty that produces the obsession. The state of not knowing that is uncomfortable enough to be unlivable, but not conclusive enough to force a resolution. They are suspended in it. And the suspension, the very fact of how uncomfortable the not knowing has become, is itself information about the significance of what they stand to lose or gain, depending on how the uncertainty resolves. People do not obsess over uncertainties that do not matter to them. The magnitude of the obsession is a direct index of the magnitude of the mattering. Now I want to come back to what I mentioned in the opening. The question of whether your perception is trustworthy, because I am reading something in your field that I want to name. You have sensed this, not necessarily with the full conscious articulation of they are obsessing over reaching out to me, but in the subtler, less organized form of perception that arrives before language has had a chance to organize it into sentences. You have felt something, a quality of continued presence in the situation that does not match the surface narrative of mutual distance or mutual moving on. Something that has made you curious enough, uncertain enough, hopeful enough to find a reading with this title and press play. That something is real. The thing that made you seek out this specific reading today is the same perceptual faculty that has been registering below the level of confident articulation what has actually been happening on their end. Your instincts found the title before your conscious reasoning had fully assembled the case. That is your perception working correctly. Trust it. Not because I am telling you to, because the evidence, which is what we started with and what I want to return to as we close, supports it. Let me give you that evidence plainly. Someone who has genuinely moved on does not require the sustained internal effort that this person is currently expending to maintain the appearance of having moved on. Someone who has genuinely moved on does not live in a loop of constructed opening lines and counter-arguments and aborted reaching out. Someone who has genuinely moved on does not return, compulsively and without choosing to a specific memory or exchange looking for information about whether the door is still open. Someone who has genuinely moved on does not feel what I am reading in this person's field, which is the specific, exhausting, quietly desperate quality of someone who wants something they have convinced themselves they cannot have, and who has not yet found a way to either get it or genuinely release it. This person has done neither. They are in the most uncomfortable position available in the landscape of human wanting. Wanting fully, pursuing not at all, and unable to stop doing either. Something came through toward the end of this reading that I want to include because it arrived with a specificity that I think belongs to you directly rather than to the general Virgo collective. There is a window, not an unlimited one. Not in the sense of something that will remain open indefinitely regardless of what happens or does not happen, but currently open, currently an actual, real, available window of possibility in which the dynamic between you has not yet calcified into something permanent that would require considerably more than a single act of courage to reopen. The obsession I have been describing is not static. It has a direction to it. It is building toward something rather than simply cycling indefinitely. The loop is tightening. The distance between the impulse and the counterargument is shrinking in the direction of the impulse. Something is going to break the loop, either from their side, which the reading suggests is approaching with an increasing probability that even their most reliable counterarguments are finding harder to override, or from yours. And I want to leave that second possibility on the table without telling you what to do with it, because that belongs to you. To your own assessment of what you want and what you are willing to move toward and what the situation between you actually merits. What I can tell you is that the field between you is more alive than the surface of things has been suggesting. More charged, more full of unspent possibility than either of you has been willing to say out loud. That is not nothing. That is actually quite a lot. Tell me something in the comments, not your story necessarily, though I always want to hear the stories. Tell me whether you have felt it, that specific quality of continued presence from someone who is supposedly no longer present in your life. The thing that made you find this reading on this particular day, because that feeling, the one that brought you here, is the most important piece of evidence in this entire reading, and it has been correct from the beginning. Until next time, Virgo. They have not moved on. The evidence does not support it. And somewhere in the private loop of their own obsessing, in the space between the impulse and the counter argument, they are getting closer to proving it themselves.